for welcoming me to the platform and also for inviting me to join you today. It feels like we can get closer together. So far, I'm sitting in South Africa and your meeting is in Kazakhstan. So it's interesting to cross the boundaries. I'm going to, if it's okay, just to share my screen. So I'm just going to move into the keynote presentation, and I've slightly adjusted the title that I originally started with. And I thought, it's probably a good question for us to think about, well, why living heritage matters in advancing quality education in transformations to sustainability, and especially around the SDG goal number 4, which is, as we all know, the goal that is promoting educational quality. So I'm going to talk through, this question, why living heritage matters in advancing quality education, and then perhaps, and also share some ideas on how we can go about doing this in the contemporary times. So I think the first reason why this work is so necessary is that human history is faster, it's more interconnected, it's more complex, it's activity and it's concept dependent and also value impregnated than biological history. So as we see biological systems changing, we also see human systems changing, and these systems change as a result of activities, concepts, and values that we work with. And for the most part, human history is a form of biocultural history. So culture is so important in social transformations and in the kinds of transformations that we need to understand and bring into the world today. And these our cultures manifest in our daily activities, our knowledges, our assumptions, including in our educational paradigms and praxis. And of course, much is held in ICH, and we don't always see that coming through into the education system. And at the same time, we're facing a number of planetary challenges. I think the opening speaker talked about the need for inclusion, for stronger human relations, peace. He has a picture of the massive issues we're dealing with in terms of pollution of our earth systems and how that's affecting people and so on. So by and large, the education that we currently have in place and also the development approaches and paradigms that we have come to rely on were developed in the 17th to the 19th century to drive, firstly, the imperial, the colonial, the apartheid, the industrial, and now also the big data development projects. So education has really been mainly in the service of these big projects. And this continues to the present, even in many transformative learning initiatives. And I think we're gradually getting an understanding of what this is doing. Is it's leaving so many people out. It's leaving their cultures out. It's leaving their learning potential out. And so we need to think about how to reconfigure education. So the modernist development histories have produced, I think, what I would call a globally hegemonic culture. And this globally hegemonic culture is characterized by a dualism between nature and culture relations. We see nature as separate from people, and yet people are also natural beings. We rely on the natural world just for simple things like being able to drink enough water each day. And so on. Cultures of patriarchy, scientism, technicism, instrumentalism, corporatism, over-individualization, and ecological destruction. So this hegemonic culture is heavily affecting the world's majority people, the health of our planet, and other living beings. And there is no doubt that we need a turnaround or massive shift in this dominant culture. So the question for us is, can we reframe and regenerate education with alternative cultural foundations to these globally hegemonic ones? And how do we do that in the current circumstances? So this is the bigger question, I think, of why it's important for us to bring ICH into the discussion with education. Of course, education itself is a very important process in our societies because education has the power to liberate the intellect, to unlock the imagination, and it is also fundamental for self-respect in the world that we're in today. It's key for our prosperity, our well-being, and it opens up a world of opportunities for people, makes it possible for us to contribute to a progressive and healthy society and planet. And learning benefits every human being, and should be available to all. So the question that we're dealing with really is, what kind of learning do we want to have available to all? And this, I think, is the fundamental question that we're dealing with when we're talking about what is quality education. And interestingly, that of course the human brain has stayed the same for almost 400,000 years. So physically, human beings, the architecture of our brains have not changed, but it's our cultures that have changed. And partly our cultures have changed through what we can call the miracle of condensed learning, because as we improve our ways of learning, we can learn more. And that also has a strong influence on our cultures. And of course, we've seen that happening, as I mentioned already, and we've seen it happening in such a way that it is actually causing problems for us now. So we really need to shift and think more deeply about what we do in education. And what we do in education matters. So what can we do in such a context? Well, we have these two areas of education that have been rising so quickly in the last 20 to 30 years or more. One is education for sustainable development that aims to empower learners of all ages to create a sustainable world, ensure environmental protection and conservation, promote social equity, and encourage economic sustainability. And at the same time, we also have global citizenship education, which aims to empower learners of all ages to assume active roles both locally and globally in building more peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, and secure societies. So we have these two very progressive areas of education that are rising very strongly and quickly in education systems. And I think that these can be the foundation of regenerative cultures in and for education. But the point that I want to make, and we can see them coming together here in Target 4.7 of SDG 4, which says that by 2030, we need to ensure that skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, amongst others, education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. And I think this is very important because it's actually the foundation of the rest, if I could say that. And hence, I think is very crucial in this whole process of redefining quality education. So if we look at some of the research that UNESCO has done, we've seen that in global citizenship education and in ESD, there's a move towards a stronger balance between, cognitive style education, social and emotional forms of education, and of course behavioral or action-centered forms of education. And we can see a different balance in global citizenship education and ESD. So it's very interesting that we're also having a discussion now in education about a better balance between different modalities of education and learning. And of course, ESD and GCED bring this into the education system and help then with this, restructuring of the foundations, the cultural foundations of education. So this is the question that I think ICH makes us focus on. It asks the question, how culturally diverse is education? Is education allowing our living heritage or our ICH in, or does it continue to promote a static view of dominant hegemonic cultures, for example, the technicism, patriarchy, environmental protection, whiteness, etc.? And what efforts are being made to resolve the culture-nature dualism, which has produced global environmental destruction, threatening our biodiversity and our own species being? So these are the questions that bringing ICH, into education raises for us. And of course, one of the things we need to be able to do as educators, if we are going to take ICH seriously, is think about how to mobilize living heritage or ICH in education. And of course, one of the most beautiful things about this is that there is so much ICH, so much living heritage around us, and we only need to look oftentimes outside of the school walls into our communities, into our societies, and we can begin to see, so much potential for curriculum innovation, for curriculum renewal, for bringing new ideas into education. But of course, there's a question of how we should do that. I wanted to share this example to just one of the areas of living heritage and ICH that I really enjoy a lot is street art, because I find that street art is such a kind of dynamic form and representation of intangible cultural heritage. And here's just a couple of little pictures from different parts of the world where you can see here this sort of turtle, coming through this big pipe. And of course, that's a comment on the state of our biodiversity. Here's a young woman with a coronavirus mask on with hope written on it. And that's a comment about, the coronavirus condition and how it's shaping our experiences of life now. Here's one about Einstein, and, just Google it, which is a comment about our whole society and how it's dealing with knowledge. And this little one I'll elaborate a little bit more on, and this one as well. So I often find this a very interesting way of just, mobilizing living heritage in education by just starting to look around us and to bring living heritage into education. And if we were to use living heritage as a foundation of learning, in other words, if we start the learning process with living heritage that exists in our environment, in our communities, and if we surface that and bring it into classrooms and into formal and informal and other forms of learning, we have the potential to expand learning. And we can expand learning in different ways. And in this case, if I take this picture of this little young woman watering a tree or a plant in her city, it can take us to the whole concept of urban farming, for example. And we can actually go into practical activities of urban farming in our education. And we can do biology, agriculture, and geography. It can take us to other analyses and research. Here's a fantastic project that's using big data technologies to try to map top urban agricultural solutions around the world and make those insights available to us so that we can learn more from other urban agricultural solutions around the world. And we can also begin to think about urban agriculture in the context of city sustainability. And therefore, it can take us into, thinking about our futures and about the kinds of world that we do want in our cities. So we can mobilize mathematics, ICTs, sustainability, and we can see here that we get a much more enriched picture of learning. And the learning is well grounded. It's grounded in something that matters to us in the community. As you can see, this street art image is clearly signaling that this is something important to do, urban renewal, to bring something new into our cities. So that's one example, and I'm going to just play with a couple of examples just to raise an issue here. Here's another example of a street art project in the city of Cape Town here in South Africa. There's quite a strong solidarity relationship between South Africa and Palestine because of the histories of apartheid and separation and separatist development and oppression. So in the city of Cape Town, they had a project, and they got community members to come and develop the street art further. And what happened here, you can see this, there's a picture of the Palestinian flag painted as a tear in the woman's eye, and also the colors of the Palestinian flag painted into her headscarf. And so this very interesting living heritage project, which is also a political solidarity project and also a history project for South African learners, can be based in geography, social studies, and arts. And it can bring us to a long and deep discussion about human rights. In other words, we can expand learning from that living heritage platform. We can go into the details of human rights. We can go into the discourses of human rights, the politics of it, and we can go into history, politics, life skills. We can go into, areas of democracy, tolerance, law, freedom, and more, as we, open up this area of learning from the living heritage practice. And we can go into, the histories and the crimes of apartheid, systematic oppression, and we're able to reflect on ourselves as human beings. All human beings are born free and equal with dignity and rights. And of course, that's a huge lesson that we've learned in South Africa over many, many years of struggle. And we're seeing, other communities around the world doing the same thing. And so we can actually learn together and build solidarity relationships through this approach to mobilizing living heritage in education. There's so many other examples, and we can draw, processes of mobilizing living heritage from cultural practices, for example, boat building, cooking practices, textile production practices, making practices, and we can see these also, of course, all across our societies and our communities. And every community and every culture has these beautiful practices, and yet sometimes they just remain hidden in the education of communities and children. So how do we bring these in is the question. How do we mobilize them and bring them in? So here's an example from a context also here in South Africa. It's a seed saving practice you can see in a township community. And here is a local knowledge custodian and got all these beautiful bags of seed that they are saving and sharing. The diversity of seed is such a beautiful metaphor actually for diversity of heritage. And of course, one can expand from here to think about what do we do with seed in agriculture, and what we can learn from that is that we are reducing the diversity of seed through our types of agricultural practices and politics. We can go into communities and look at diversity of production. We can learn about indigenous knowledge systems. We can learn about indigenous knowledge and science. We can learn about intellectual property in the 21st century and the politics of that, the politics of seed and who owns the seed. It's a huge area of challenge. And of course, that can take us into thinking about indigenous knowledge systems and better climate change responsiveness, where we actually need more diversity of seed. So these are some of the things that we can do with living heritage. So another little example. So the reason why I'm bringing these examples is really to think about, can we build a model that can avoid bifurcation of living heritage and education? Because I think that we can end up seeing ICH as something separate to education, but in fact, how do we avoid dividing the two and making the one better than the other? And how do we make them something richer together? And this is the little model that I'm trying to work on here. So if we say living heritage is a foundation of learning, that we can expand learning from our living heritages with new knowledge and experience. And we can then also evaluate what is coming up in the new knowledge arena in relation to contemporary concerns that are affecting ourselves and society. And this offers a dynamism to living heritage. So this process type of a model is something that we're experimenting with and trying to research further. And I'll share with you some of the detail of that. So most often in the education systems, the dominant hegemonic cultures in education leave out the dynamism of living heritage as a foundation of learning. And so what we see large numbers of learners across the world learning with new knowledge and experience, but it's not connected to their own lives and experiences. And so they have a bit of a disembedded experience. And so then they also experience new knowledge as a technical imposition, decontextualized from their life experience. Education loses relevance and becomes mechanistic. And the social and emotional, the values in the community are left out or marginalized, and the opportunities for reflexive action in own contexts and therefore also transformative learning are diminished. So I think that education systems and all teaching activities, lessons and programs should bring living heritage in and build on it as a foundation for expansive transformative learning. So that should help to strengthen the safeguarding, the transmission, and not reduce living heritage as something that's outside of education, but as an integral part of it. And this does not mean that we should not teach the curriculum. We can still teach the curriculum, but it means that we need to teach the curriculum in a fundamentally different way. Offers more scope for critique and evaluation of the dominant narratives that are embedded in the curriculum. We can evaluate the agricultural science curriculum with that, living heritage of diversity of seed, for example. And in this way, the curriculum can gain relevance and transformative learning potential. So if we think about the curriculum as a cultural story that we choose to tell our children, we make those curriculums, and we use those to tell the next generation a story about our society. We can choose to tell a fuller story that is inclusive of our living heritage as found in our communities and the world around us, or we can choose to tell a narrower story that leaves children grappling with abstract, decontextualized knowledge and oftentimes technical forms of skills acquisition. So living heritage, when seen as integral to education and when seen as an important foundation of expansive learning, enhances the quality of education, implements the principles and purposes of ESD and GCED or SDG 4.7, and it enriches the formal curriculum immensely. It brings relevance and transformative potential into education, and it also enhances learner achievement potential because learning becomes more meaningful to the learner, and learning is about meaning making. So a simple principle of including living heritage can, I think, really add to learner success and achievement. And in our research, we've seen that occurring. Each time we include living heritage, the learners are more able to work with, the other concepts and processes in the curriculum because it becomes more meaningful to them. So this is a very interesting issue, and I think it does need a lot more research at an international level. We've done research on this for quite a number of years, since almost 10, 15 years now. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to think about the meanings of quality education. And our first research that we did, we found that there were two very dominant meanings of quality education. One was around including learners in the education system. So, the EFA, Education for All type of agenda, very important because people need to participate in education for it to be even possible, And then there's this efficiency or more of an economic discourse, which is about learning as successful performance and successful mastery. These two models of quality are what dominate education around the world. And so what we started to do, working with communities, with bearers of living heritage, ICH, looking at our environments, just drawing more from the contexts, we started to include a sociocultural and social ecological dimension to quality education. And we were able to achieve another focus, which is learning as connection in and with communities and society. And ultimately, we need all three of these in order to have a quality education. We need to be learning, making connections, meaning making, understanding the situation, seeing how knowledge relates to our experiences in the world. We need to be able to do that in order to be successful in an education learning pathway, and we need to be able to participate fully in that. So these three concepts for guiding quality education, I think, are very important. And our teaching methods, we need to ultimately include all three of them in our teaching methods. So if we're teaching just for efficiency or mastery of a technique, we could lose the meaning-making potential, you see. So these are important things that we've been trying to develop, and trying to develop a different framework for understanding educational quality, because this, of course, influences how we measure success in the education system. It influences the assessment systems. It influences pretty much everything that goes on in an education system, our conception of quality education. So we've found that ICH and living heritage is very important for enabling learning as connection. And this requires full participation in learning, in other words, a democratic process. And together, these enable and improve mastery or success in learning. So this is really the sort of key contribution that I want to bring this morning to you. And in the context of this statement that UNESCO has recently released out of the ESD World Conference, which says that transformative learning for people and the planet is a necessity for our survival and that of future generations. Time to learn and act for our planet is now. So we can see that there's a very deep and important need to advance transformative learning. And so we need models that are not going to bifurcate us into ESD and GCED or into ICH and education, but we have to bring these together via transformative learning processes. And then I just wanted to touch on, I think the previous speaker also talked about, what's happening to us as we've all been pushed online with the COVID-19 situation. And I think that we have to ask a question, very careful question, whether we are going to be able to fully see each other and the transformation demands in our worlds via these data cultures, learning management systems, Zoom, MOOC cultures, and so on. And we have to be very clear about what we are gaining and also what we are losing. And it's been interesting to follow some of the debates here, because some people are gaining a lot of money, the Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett, as everybody goes online and has to keep buying data and so on. And then, interestingly enough, we're starting to see some educational research coming through, which is saying the things that we're losing are authentic communication, personalized support for learning, monitoring the learning process, feedback, explanations for understanding, individual counseling. And I think we can also lose local diversity in education. So ICH is more needed now than ever as we face, this very challenging time in education, because ICH can anchor us in the world that we find ourselves in and not turn us all into homogenous people on an e-learning platform. So these are the challenges we are facing in education. So I really do want to encourage this community to continue the excellent work. We are working with UNESCO's Living Heritage, ICH Directorate and Education Directorate, GCED directorates to bring these areas of work together. It's very, very important work. We're developing an online training of trainers course, and we're still, experimenting and working it out. And I'm sure that all of you will be part of, the dialogues that are emerging here as we go forward together. So thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you for inviting me.